Once upon a time, there lived a poor miller who had 3 sons. When he died, he left his mill to his eldest son, his donkey to the second son, and his cat to the youngest son. The youngest son was quite unhappy with his inheritance. "What am I supposed to do with a cat?" he sighed. "My brothers can make a living with the mill and the donkey, but I'll probably just end up eating this cat and making a mitten from its fur. Then I'll have nothing left." The cat, who was listening nearby, sat up and said with a serious air, "Don't you worry, master. Just give me a bag and a pair of boots made to fit me, and you'll see that your inheritance is not as bad as you think." The miller's son was astonished to hear a cat speak, but he was also curious. He had seen the cat perform such clever tricks before, like catching rats and mice, so he thought, well, maybe there's something to what he says. So he took the cat to a cobbler and had a tiny pair of boots made just for him. Once the cat had his boots on, he looked quite dashing. He put the bag around his neck, held the strings in his paws, and went off to a field where he knew there were many rabbits. He put some bran and tasty greens into his bag, laid down, and pretended to be dead. He waited patiently for a young, foolish rabbit to come along and nibble at the delicious bait inside the bag. Soon enough, a reckless young rabbit hopped right in. Quick as a flash, the cat pulled the strings tight, trapping the rabbit inside. Proud of his catch, the clever cat, now known as Puss in Boots, went straight to the king's palace. He requested to speak with the king. When he was brought before his majesty, he made a low bow and said, "I have brought you, sir, a rabbit from the fields of my noble lord, the Marquis of Carabas." This was the title he had invented for his master. The king was pleased and said, "Tell your master that I thank him and that I am very pleased with his gift." Another day, Puss in Boots hid in a cornfield, holding his bag open. This time, he caught 2 partridges. He went and presented them to the king, just as he had done with the rabbit. The king again accepted the gift with pleasure and even gave the cat a small tip. For the next 2 or 3 months, the cat continued to bring the king gifts of game, always claiming they were from his master, the Marquis of Carabas. One day, Puss in Boots learned that the king was planning to take a drive along the riverbank with his daughter, the most beautiful princess in the world. He ran to his master and said, "If you follow my advice, your fortune is made. You must go and bathe in the river at the spot I show you, and leave the rest to me." The miller's son did as the cat said, not knowing what his plan was. While he was bathing, the king's carriage came by. Puss in Boots started crying out as loudly as he could, "Help! Help! My lord the Marquis of Carabas is drowning." The king heard the cry and put his head out of the carriage window. Recognizing the cat who had brought him so many gifts, he ordered his guards to rush to the aid of the Marquis of Carabas, while they were pulling the poor Marquis out of the river. Puss in Boots approached the carriage and told the king that while his master was bathing, some thieves had come by and stolen his clothes. In reality, the clever cat had hidden them under a large stone. The king immediately commanded his attendants to fetch a suit from his own royal wardrobe for the Marquis of Carabas. The clothes were a perfect fit, and since they were very fine, the miller's son looked handsome and noble, like a true gentleman. The princess saw him and was immediately taken with him. The king was also quite impressed and invited the young man to join them in their carriage for the drive. Puss in Boots was overjoyed to see his plan working so well. He ran on ahead of the carriage. He came across some peasants mowing a meadow. He said to them, "Good people, if the king asks who this meadow belongs to, you must say it belongs to the Marquis of Carabas. If you don't, you shall all be chopped into little pieces." When the king's carriage passed by, the king asked the mowers to whom the beautiful meadow belonged. "To my lord the Marquis of Carabas." They all answered in unison, for they were frightened by the cat's threat. "You have a very fine estate," said the king to the miller's son. Puss in Boots, still running ahead, came across some reapers. He told them, "Good people, if the king asks whose corn this is, you must say it belongs to the Marquis of Carabas. If you fail, you shall all be chopped into little pieces." A moment later, the king drove by and asked whose corn he saw. "It belongs to my lord the Marquis of Carabas," replied the reapers. The king was once again very pleased with the young man. The cat continued to run ahead, saying the same thing to everyone he met. The king was astonished at the vast riches of the Marquis of Carabas. Finally, Puss in Boots arrived at a grand castle. The master of this castle was a fearsome ogre, the richest ever known, for all the lands the king had passed through actually belonged to him. The cat had done his research and knew all about the ogre. He requested to see him, saying he couldn't pass so close to the castle without paying his respects. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could, and asked him to sit down. "I have been told," said the cat, "that you have the ability to change yourself into any kind of creature you please. You can, for instance, transform yourself into a lion or an elephant." "That is true," answered the ogre gruffly, "and to prove it, you shall see me now become a lion." Puss in Boots was so terrified at the sight of a lion so close to him that he scrambled up the curtains, not without some difficulty because of his boots. A little while later, when the ogre had changed back to his normal form, the cat came down and admitted he had been very frightened. "Furthermore," said the cat, "I have also been told that you can change yourself into the smallest of animals, for example, a rat or a mouse. I must confess, I find that impossible to believe." "Impossible," cried the ogre, "you shall see." And in that instant, he changed himself into a tiny mouse and began to run about the floor. The moment Puss in Boots saw him, he pounced on him and ate him up. Meanwhile, the king, who saw the beautiful castle in the distance, wished to go inside. Puss in Boots heard the sound of the carriage rolling over the drawbridge and ran out to meet it. "Your Majesty," he said with a grand bow, "welcome to the castle of my lord the Marquis of Carabas." "What, my lord Marquis?" cried the king. "Does this castle also belong to you? There can be nothing finer than this court and all the stately buildings which surround it. Let us go in, if you please." The miller's son gave his hand to the young princess, and they followed the king, who went first. They entered a magnificent hall where they found a splendid feast laid out. The ogre had prepared it for some friends who were supposed to visit him that very day, but they did not dare to enter, knowing the king was there. The king was charmed with the good qualities of the Marquis of Carabas, and so was his daughter, who was completely in love with him. Seeing the vast riches he possessed, the king said to him, "It will be your own fault, my lord Marquis, if you do not become my son." The Marquis accepted the honor with many bows, and that very same day he married the princess. And what about Puss in Boots? He became a great lord and never had to chase mice again, except for fun, and they all lived happily ever after. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories.